Today's video is brought to you by ASRock and the Z390 Phantom Gaming X, or is it Phantom Gaming 10? It's a high-end board from ASRock for your 5 GHz CPU. Look, if you're going to get a 9900K or the new 5 GHz all-core out of the box 9900KS, you need a motherboard like the Z390 Phantom Gaming X at the very highest end. It gives you all the tunables in UEFI. It's got tons of USB 3 connectivity. You got 5 ports that are built right in that are USB 3.1 Gen 2. Those are 10 gigabit, including one Type-C at the front and one Type-C at the rear. Then you got 8 USB 3 for the front panel connection, so that's the USB 3 5 gigabit. You've got 3 LAN connections, 2 Intel NICs and 1 Realtek 2.5 gigabit NIC. You got 3 M.2, full thermal armor. I mean, it's got the crazy like hex bit. The whole thing's metal. It's pretty nuts. It's a solid board. Thanks, ASRock. FreeNAS versus Unraid. Fight! At least that's how it feels sometimes, right? It's like everybody, it's like, oh, it's the home team. Yes, look at the sports ball go. It's not like that at all. FreeNAS and Unraid have different philosophies. I don't want to say they're trying to solve different problems. In some respects they are, but they both need love. Some different kinds of love. And they're not the only solution out there. If you saw the video with GamersNexus, where I was summoned through the telecom rack, yes, that is a thing. You have to grind up old Sun processors, and they're getting harder to find, so. But I digress. You saw the video that we were trying to find a good solution that has a nice point-and-click GUI. Now here at level 1, we use ZFS on Linux, and the command line interface is good enough for us. But you don't necessarily, I mean, you can do the command line management, and sometimes, even with the GUI, you're still going to end up using the command line. But it's nice to have automation, it's nice to have a dashboard, it's nice to be able to see things at a glance. Doing everything completely manually is not really a badge of honor. Although I do like watching that Primitive Technology YouTube channel where the dude literally does everything manually. I mean, it's cool to see, I just wouldn't want to live like that. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like that with the GUI. So FreeNAS is based on FreeBSD, and FreeBSD is quite solid. It's a great operating system. It is philosophically different than Linux. Unraid is based on Linux. There has been some controversy around that in the past. Both of them are really designed to run from a USB stick. Both of them are designed to give you somewhere to store your stuff. Both of them are kind of aimed at sort of a home user, like home power user-ish sort of a workload. FreeNAS is backed by IX Systems. They offer TrueNAS, a lot of enterprise stuff. Those guys really know what they're doing. And the way that you do things in the enterprise is very different than the way that you do things, you know, at home, just hacking stuff together. And so that really brings me to one of the first main differences in the philosophy. Unraid is designed to deal with multiple disks added over time, which is something that you would have for like a home user workload scenario. Let's say that I've got, 2 8 terabyte hard drives, and I'm just going to mirror them, and that's going to be my setup. That's going to be how I deal with documents and that kind of thing. And then later, it's like, 8 terabytes is not really enough. I need to add another 8 terabytes. Well, theoretically, I could just buy another 8 terabyte drive, and I would have to juggle the redundancy a little bit, but theoretically, I could set up 3 8 terabyte drives such that any one of them could die, and I would lose no information whatsoever in that setup. The problem is with ZFS. ZFS is $1 billion file system. It's amazing. It's like having a starship in charge of your file system. It is incredible. It is an incredible piece of engineering, and it solves a lot of problems. It wasn't really designed to run on a relatively small number of disks. It was designed to run an entire enterprise. It was designed to run the enterprise, basically. I mean, in terms of like file system capacity and just every metric I can think of, except being tuned for blistering performance, it ticks all the boxes. Redundancy, replication, backup, like efficient backup management and deduplication optionally, although here there be tigers, don't necessarily enable deduplication unless you know what you're doing, and that's a subject for another day. But ZFS is great. Yes, I hear BTRFS and other file systems, and I actually did some testing before the GamersNexus thing. BTRFS has come a long way. I was surprised at the survivability of BTRS RAID 5 and 6 testing. It was much better than I expected. Still not as polished as ZFS. ZFS is much more communicative in terms of like if things have issues, or if things are failing, or if stuff's acting weird. ZFS is much more robust, let's say. Back to the matter at hand. FreeNAS versus Unraid. So I think Unraid is a little more noob friendly. The thing that's the best about Unraid, honestly, is the community. The community that is working on Unraid is incredible. They have done just a phenomenal amount of work. So there's a plugin that you can install on Unraid that's sort of the unofficial community plugin, and this is really something that ZFS could take note of here, because there are plugins for ZFS that are cool, like Plex Media Server and MB and some other stuff. You know, you can do torrents and news groups and all sorts of stuff, but the Unraid ecosystem is much more of a delicious potpourri, let's say, than the ZFS system. I think the ZFS team could take a page from Unraid's book and maybe make things a little more community accessible. Like, here's the enthusiasts that work for IX Systems are maintaining these plugins, and then if you want to color outside the lines a little bit, you can have these plugins. Both of them support virtual machines and jails or Docker containers. So on Unraid, the containerization technology is Docker. You can set up Docker containers on Unraid, although the UI is broken in some interesting ways. I'll talk about it in a second. And on FreeBSD, you are also able to use Docker via a VM, but the more proper BSD mechanism is a jail, and so there aren't as many ready-made jails out there as there are Docker containers, but you can totally use Docker containers on FreeBSD. So those are about equal in terms of virtual machine support and container support. FreeNAS and FreeBSD basically identical. The one place where Unraid excels in this category is hardware pass-through. The Linux kernel, really great support, everything's good. FreeBSD, it's an older version of FreeBSD with FreeNAS. Beehive is getting to be very mature. Some things are changing, probably gonna have to wait on FreeBSD 12, but by and large, you can do hardware pass-through on FreeBSD, but not via the FreeNAS GUI, and you can jump through some hoops at the command line, which also wouldn't bother me, but not the most stable experience unless you are running bleeding edge. So experimented with that a little bit. It was not to my liking. So ultimately decided to do ZFS on Unraid. Now ZFS on Unraid is a community supported plugin, and Unraid is sort of like, Unraid has this array, and the array is this software powered thing that does redundancy and the rebalancing of disks and stuff like that. So you can add mismatched disks, they can be different sizes. You can break all the rules that you have with ZFS, where ZFS is like, no, you need to add a group of disks at a time. For Steve's particular setup, we're using a single SSD, the single NVMe SSD for the array, and that is periodically copied to the ZFS array. And the ZFS array is made up of 18 mechanical hard drives in 3 VDEVs. So VDEVs are like the constituent components of a ZFS pool, and each VDEV is responsible for its own redundancy. So he has 4 14 terabyte drives in a RAID Z1, and then there are 2 6-drive RAID Z2 pools that contribute to that, and that makes his storage array. And so that many spindles mean that you have no problem saturating 10 gig Ethernet. It's really fast, even though it's mechanical hard drives, and we don't really have to get too much into the whole SSD caching thing, because with video files and not really a random access thing, that sort of stuff. Docker. So the next thing is Steam Cache. We want to be able to do Steam Cache. The problem is that the Unraid GUI is not sophisticated enough to allow you to run multiple containers with a single IP address. This is of course no problem for Docker. Docker absolutely will allow you to do this. The problem is that when you're going to run Docker multiple containers on a single IP address, the IP address has to be bound to the system and not the container. If you bind an IP address to the container, then the container gets to pick what ports it uses. And so with the Steam container, like the LAN cache Docker containers that are pre-made ready to go for this, there's an SNI proxy which runs on port 443 so that HTTPS requests work for the kinds of things that Steam wants to do and Windows Update and things like that. Those are passed through unchanged. Any encrypted request is not going to be able to be cached locally. And then port 80, that is all rewritten and served from a local cache. Those are two different Docker containers, but they need to run on the same IP address. Not really a way to do that through the Docker or through the Unraid GUI, but you can totally do it with Docker. So I had to write a script to do that. And I had to use another user plugin to be able to run scripts on a schedule. The full guide for that is on the level 1 forum, but like there was no sane interface for cron, there was no sane interface for being able to run user scripts. Even customizing the Samba performance or the Samba interface. There is the SMB extra conf on Unraid, but not the, I mean, you can change it in the UI and the backend, but it's not the best user interface. Those user plugins, the community is really where the value comes from on Unraid, because they're doing super cool stuff. And so hopefully my how-to takes you up another notch in terms of super cool how-to. The other thing I'll mention is snapshots. So in Windows, there's this thing called shadow copy, and it was in Windows 2000. It was in Server 2003 and Windows XP, and Microsoft has destroyed it in Windows 10. I don't know why. It was such a good feature. It was amazing. They've got this like files and backup thing. It's crap. It's utter crap. Microsoft has screwed the pooch on shadow copy, but the interface is still there, and you can still use it on servers. So for Samba, you can set up Samba and make your ZFS snapshots map to shadow copy snapshots. So you can create a schedule that snapshots your file system, say twice a day, and this works exceptionally well with ZFS. And you can see those snapshots in the GUI in, say, a Windows client in the shadow copy tab with just a little bit of configuration in your Samba. Now there is an example on the Unraid forum of also configuring the recycle bin so that if you delete something, it goes to the recycle bin. But the Windows operating system, being the schizophrenic moose on rollerblades that it is, does not always honor the recycle bin. So I would really strongly suggest that if you care about your files, you should implement the snapshotting thing. I trust ZFS snapshots. I don't trust Windows as far as I could throw Steve Ballmer, which is not very far. What about other stuff? Well, there are some honorable mentions here. First, VMware ESXi. VMware is the go-to. I don't care what anybody says, VMware is still far and away ahead of everybody in the virtualization game. It is great software. It doesn't have underlying support for any file systems like ZFS. It expects you to do all that in hardware or to have a cluster of multiple physical computers. So not really an option for Steve, GamersNexus, although I do like VMware. VMware is a good product, and yes, it's very pricey, but you get what you pay for. Proxmox. I've got to revisit Proxmox. Proxmox is a Linux distribution, but it's so much more than a Linux distribution. It is actually a viable alternative to VMware that costs dramatically less. It's worth the price of support. It's pretty good. I've used it for years. I've got some boxes, as a matter of fact, that are pretty far out of date that I need to update. And it's a story for another day. Proxmox is got a reasonable web GUI for managing virtual machines, and it's built to do sort of the like multiple virtual machine management, like consolidation. It would totally handle a ZFS array and exposing that to the network and a whole bunch of Docker containers and VMs. It is more oriented to running a whole bunch of VMs, and so it's a little bit DIY when it comes to, you know, adding some of the cool stuff that we saw in the Unraid GUI for like community plugins like media managers and Plex Media Server and stuff like that. Yes, you can do it, but there's also Clone OS. Now, this one's kind of flying under the radar. It's cloneos.techroutine.com, and this is a FreeBSD based thing, but the GUI is slick as heck. I have not tried this, but it is FreeBSD and Beehive, but with virtual machines. So it's like FreeNAS, but it's more virtual machine oriented, and because it's got that yummy, delicious FreeBSD core, it has the ZFS stuff, and it seems to have the ZFS stuff in the GUI. So that might have been a pretty good choice. I didn't get a chance to try it, and it seems a little bit new, so maybe not the most mature, but maybe some stuff could be borrowed from that. I don't know. It's a possibility. You could also use, like, so we use Fedora, and you could also use some of the Webmin. There's more than just Webmin, but you could use some of the Webmin style management utilities for that, but I didn't think that would be a good fit for Steve's use case. And yes, there are a bunch of tangents and, you know, sort of, you can go off in the weeds with a whole bunch of different options, but Unraid and FreeNAS are two immensely popular options. And historically, you know, FreeNAS is it's a little obtuse, especially for newbies. Like, if you are, even if you're very experienced with a computer Like if you have a lot of experience with Windows and a little bit of experience with Linux, you have certain ideas about how things are. And the FreeNAS philosophy definitely comes from people that have a lot more experience in the enterprise, because things are just fundamentally done differently in the enterprise. And I really appreciate that about FreeNAS. That is not something to be knocked. But a lot of FreeNAS users are turned off when they encounter that, because it's kind of a foreign philosophy to a lot of new FreeNAS users, I think. But ZFS really is the one true file system. Nothing has caught up with it yet, but and now its development is accelerating again because of ZFS on Linux. But FreeNAS versus Unraid, that's what we're talking about today. So with that, it's pretty much set up. Now, Steve's system is a Silverstone system, and it ended up being a pretty sweet little build. It's got 8 hot swap bays built in. We added an LSI disk shelf to that's connected with 8 channels of SAS6. The SCSI interface, or the sexy interface if you're in California, SCSI, but it's serial attached SCSI, so it's SASCSI. No, I'm just making crap up now. But the expandability is there. He has, I think, another, 12 plus 4, 16 bays that he can add drives to. And if he adds them at least 4 at a time, they can become part of the ZFS pool. If not, they can become part of the pool that's the Unraid, the unwashed Unraid array. That's what we'll call that, the unwashed Unraid array, because unwashed masses. There is one other note that I will give you, which is the Docker containers don't automatically restart on startup. So the user scripts thing has a really handy dropdown for restart this or run this script when the array is mounted. It does, but it doesn't, like, Docker doesn't start until Unraid starts the array software, and then it immediately runs that before Docker is ready. I tried adding a delay to the script, it didn't work. So you just have to manually start those Docker containers. There's a Docker container for DNS and Steam Cache. Probably going to do a Docker container or another virtual machine for Fog. Fog is a pretty cool project that allows you to boot from the network, so you can do disk imaging and that sort of stuff. It's really pretty awesome. And for Steve's setup, we also added a Windows virtual machine with a passed-through graphics card to do transcoding. And so, of course, it can mount the file system, it can mount the ZFS array, and it can see all the ZFS files and do transcoding on the fly so that they're not wasting space. They can transcode everything to H.265, basically a lossless transcode, and then they're able to more efficiently use their space. So if you want to set up ZFS on Unraid, which is not something I would recommend for noobs, but I love ZFS, and ZFS is portable to Linux and FreeBSD, so it's pretty awesome in that regard. Then there's a guide on the Level 1 forum, and I've just talked you through it. And Wendell, this is Level 1. This has been a Level 1 project, and thanks again to Steve at GamersNexus for having me out. It's a most gracious host. Check out our video, because we did, GamersNexus Unplugged. It was really nice meeting Steve and all of the people behind GamersNexus. It was very awesome. Hopefully we can do that again sometime. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. I'm signing out, and you can probably find me in the Level 1 forums. See ya.